Welcome to the Compassion Podcast, brought to you by the Global Compassion Coalition. Today's episode features a panel which was recorded live on the topic of compassionate care for the youngest among us. To build a compassionate world today and have it last into the future, we must start to invest properly in the care, nurturance, and well-being of the youngest among us. This panel explored how we can do that. Welcome, everyone. I'm Christine, and I'm the head of creative partnerships here at the Global Compassion Coalition. I'm super excited for today's panel, The Best Investment, Compassionate Care for the Youngest Among Us. And I'm quickly going to introduce the host today, and then I'll hand it over to him and the panelists. So our host today is Dr. Christopher Willard, who is a clinical psychologist, author, and consultant based in Massachusetts. He's presented 2 TEDx events, had work featured in the New York Times, the Washington Post, mindful.org, and teaches at Harvard Medical School. All right, I'll go ahead and hand it over to you, Chris.
All right, thank you so much. And it's a pleasure to be here and wonderful to see people trickling in from not just around the country, but around the world is always really exciting. And I'm here with just such a wonderful panel, and we're really looking forward to thinking more deeply and reflecting on what can we actually do in terms of creating more compassionate caregiving systems for especially the early years. So I'll just introduce today's panel. We have Dr. Melissa Merrick. She's the president and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America, the nation's oldest and largest nonprofit organization dedicated to the primary prevention of child abuse and neglect. She's got more than 20 years of clinical research and leadership experience related to the etiology, course, and prevention of child abuse and neglect. Recently, she was a senior epidemiologist at the National Center for Injury Prevention in the CDC in Atlanta. She's recognized as one of the country's foremost experts on adverse childhood experiences, or ACEs, that hopefully more and more of us are hearing about. In partnership with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office of Child Abuse and Neglect, she served 8 years as the lead scientist for the ACEs study at the CDC and is the lead author of CDC's Vital Signs ACEs, the most nationally representative report on the topic. We're also here with Dr. Joshua Sparrow, Executive Director now of the Brazelton Touchpoint Center and the Division of Development of Medicine at Boston Children's Hospital, around the corner from me, where he holds an appointment in the Department of Psychiatry. He's the principal investigator on numerous foundation grants, has lectured nationally and internationally, written numerous scholarly papers, as well as books and articles for the general public. He's advised government agencies, nonprofits, and philanthropies, a board member of Parents as Teachers, and serves on the advisory boards of the Association for State and Tribal Home Visiting Initiative and Rapid Response Virtual Home Visiting. Jen Moffitt is a nurse midwife and the perinatal service manager at a community health center in Massachusetts, as well as the director of community partnerships and a senior faculty member of the Mindful Birthing and Parenting Foundation. Jen's been teaching the mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting MBCP program since 2014. Her passion for the intersectionality of mindfulness, birth, early parenting, and health equity as both intervention and prevention has led Jen to devote herself to training and mentoring perinatal and mental health professionals and bringing mindfulness to pregnancy, childbirth, and parenting. The mother of 2 spirited teenagers and a 20-plus year mindfulness practitioner, Jen brings a wealth of personal experience, humility, and passion to her work. Susan Kaiser Greenland is a best-selling author, internationally recognized leader in teaching mindfulness and meditation to children, teens, parents, and professionals. Her Inner Kids model was foundational in pioneering activity-based mindfulness for children and adults in developing secular mindfulness practices that are developmentally appropriate for young people. The Inner Kids Foundation was one of the first to bring mindfulness to the public schools in the U.S. Research on Inner Kids at UCLA's Mindful Awareness Research Center was one of the first published peer-reviewed studies in the field. In other words, she's been doing this for a long time. Susan is an advisor to Minya Rinpoche's latest project, the Turgar Schools in Kathmandu. Her next book, Almost Enlightened, great title, will be published next summer 2024. Rebecca Parlakian is the senior director at 0 to 3, where she leads a project portfolio on child development, parenting, and high-quality teaching. She leads 0 to 3's mindfulness initiative co-authored 5 curricula for parents and professionals, including the Early Connections Parent Cafe curriculum and Problem Solvers and Early Math curriculum. Rebecca holds a master's in early childhood special education from GW University and served as adjunct faculty with the university for the last 10 years. I'm so excited to be with this panel, some of whom I know, some of whom are neighbors. I didn't realize we're so close by, and all of whom are just fantastic experts doing such amazing work out there. So I'm excited to get to know them, and I hope the rest of you are too. Where I thought we begin is maybe just going around if people want to share a few words on their work and really trying to think of what, for folks who are listening today, what are some real takeaways that you most recommend that would be most helpful to folks in the audience? Again, we're a bit North America centric here, but we have a lot of folks from around the world certainly watching today. But we'd love to know about what you all feel like truly are the best investments that we can make, as well as maybe an overview of some of the problems that you see from the kind of work that you're doing, and maybe some of the more unique problems that we're facing, unfortunately, even in this very wealthy country where we live, where we still have plenty of problems. Melissa, can we start with you?
Sure, I'm happy to be with you all, and that was a big question, but I'm happy to kick us off. So I'm Melissa Merrick. So nice to see so many people from around the world. Shout out, I see someone from Trinidad. My mom is from Trinidad originally. I grew up in Miami. I lived in Atlanta, so I see a lot of commonalities among us, and we're here. Global Compassion Coalition. And I mean, for me at the center, right, is like, what have we developed over the last, 3-4 years? Parenting is always challenging, but parenting during a global health pandemic, during a time of acute racial and civil unrest everywhere, certainly here in the US. And really, how do we operationalize that we need each other, that none of us does this parenting job alone. We're all connected, and really taking a public health approach requires us to really examine what we as a society do collectively to assure the conditions in which children can thrive and in which families are supported and in which we can help kind of lessen the load on families. So at Prevent Child Abuse America, we do this work over the last 50 years through 2 large networks. So we have state chapters that are kind of the boots on the ground. They're the prevention entity for their states. We're looking at state level policy and programs and really delivering that in the context that makes sense for their community, right? And then we do it through a large evidence-based home visiting model called Healthy Families America, which is in 600 sites around the country, DC, the 5 US territories, and in Israel, but really across home visiting models in this country. In this country, we're only meeting about 5% of families who could benefit from home visitation, which really is a front end support that helps to meet families where they are so that they can really access their best selves in parenting effectively. So I think there's a whole lot we can do. Certainly at PCA America, we work a lot on the Hill and trying to formulate and advocate for national investments and federal policies like home visitation, evidence-based home visitation, but also things like concrete supports for families, right? Things like paid family leave, health care, earned income tax credits, these things that, again, help to lessen the load that's on all of us all the time. And of course, research and evaluation, continuing to grow the body of research that shows that things that happen in the earliest years stay with us. Childhood lasts a lifetime in terms of the impacts on the brain development, the way our endocrine systems function, immune systems, even the way our genes express themselves are largely impacted by the earliest years. So we want the strongest start for children and families. And we do that by helping to make sure that families have what they need, when they need it, in their own communities, without stigma before they're in crisis. So certainly the US is a very reactionary country. We wait until families are in crisis to be able to access services and supports that could have kept them strong in the first place. So that's the work that we do. And we recognize that it's up to all of us, right? Prevention can only happen in partnership. And when we say that, we mean with other entities, yes, many of the experts that are on the call today, but we mean that increasingly in terms of the co-creation of solutions with families themselves, right? So there's a tremendous amount of lived expertise everywhere, and centering families is critical. And it's something I have to say that we as a country have not done well. We as a workforce have not done well, right? We've really taken top-down approaches like, oh, we have PhDs and we have MDs and we know best. And we see that what we've done has not served us well as one of the wealthiest countries, as you said in your framing. How is it that we don't have the reach that we need to have, that we don't have the prevention impact that we want to have? And I will say that I think that's largely because we are in a divisive time, right? But we mostly all agree that parents love their kids and we want the best for kids. What we sometimes disagree on, largely disagree on, is who should pay for it, who should get the credit, what do we do first, second, and third? So I would say conversations like this that bring us all together, that really make us recognize that the work that we're doing along the prevention continuum, primary prevention, stopping violence before it occurs in the first place, but also things like secondary and tertiary and changing trajectories for children after violence and stuff has occurred, is still critical to this work. So I just think the work that we're all doing as parents, as professionals, there's a lot of direct service practitioners that are part of this movement, right? And that's always going to be important, but increasingly policy levers, right? When we prevent early adversity in the first place through economic supports, through norms change, through just relationship building, we can impact largely many of our nation's health, well-being, and prosperity goals. So a long-winded way to say I'm so excited for this conversation today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Chris.
Thank you so much, Dr. Merrick. And I really appreciate, I think, hopefully we're starting to figure out, I think, these lessons around humility, relationships, co-creation, of solutions, rather than, as you said, that top down. And I think too that we are in this divided time, but I think you are absolutely right. I think we do all love our kids. We have maybe different priorities, different solutions, different kinds of thoughts, around the country, around the world on how and who should do this work exactly. But we all, I think, can pretty much agree that we want the best for our kids. And just remembering that as the starting point of our conversations, I think then we're building from this place of commonality and co-creating these solutions and preventions that I think are just so important. So I really appreciate you bringing those points to the fore, and just the amazing work that you're doing. So thank you, Dr. Merrick. Josh, can you share a little bit about the work that you're doing with the Brazelton and some thoughts on what you feel like folks can really do? What are some of the most important interventions from what you see?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Global Compassion Coalition. It's truly a privilege to be able to be together again with old friends and to make new ones. At the Brazelton Touchpoint Center, our vision is for a world in which every child experiences love, joy, and wonder, and grows up to be an adult who can strengthen our community's capacity for self-determination, cope with adversity, advance racial and economic equity, steward our planet's fragile resources, and experience the joy of nurturing the next generation to do the same. So clearly, we can't do that work all alone. And so much of our work is about partnerships with so many people who are committed to the same vision, like so many of you. And we see every child as all our children, not in the sense of making decisions for or determining experiences or goals for other people's children, but for understanding our responsibility for the actions we take that influence them. And to do this work, our mission is to partner. As I said, we need these partnerships to do this, to work towards that vision, to partner with family-facing providers. That's probably most of you, people working in every sector that touches infants, toddlers, and their families, and expectant families, as well as researchers, advocates, policymakers, and their institutions, so that together we can learn to listen to and amplify the voices that are often unheard of babies, children, and families, and to co-create with them, we've heard that word already today, to co-create with them practical, incremental solutions to the challenges they express. And that, again, is out of our commitment to the self-determination of families and communities, and practical and incremental because babies can't wait. In our work, we began half a century ago by listening to babies and families, and they taught us about their strengths and their wisdom and what their cultures and communities gave them as strengths, as wisdom, and as resources for babies and children to thrive and flourish. And we see our work not as fixing people, but as fixing systems. And in the United States, our systems are broken. And I understand that we are joined by people from all over the world. And in the United States, it is often not very effective to talk about the ways in which the United States lags behind so many other countries. That's considered unpatriotic rather than simply a matter of learning and being open. So I won't dwell on the ways in which the United States is behind, simply to say that there are many, and we would have much to learn from our fellow humans around the world. In terms of what we all can do, there's so much, but Chris, I thought I would just focus on climate and environmental justice, because I do think it is the existential crisis for all of us. And I think for those of us who are focused on supporting the flourishing of infants and children and their families and expectant families, so much of that depends on the conditions and contexts in which parents and families and other adult caregivers have the strengths and wisdom from their communities and their cultures to figure out what they need to do. But it's a lot harder when people are experiencing food insecurity, water shortages, and the trauma that goes along with wildfires and droughts and floods and tornadoes and rising sea levels and all the other consequences of our addiction to fossil fuel. And so it may seem like more than any of us can take on, and yet I think that all of us can find even small everyday ways that we can care for the part of the earth that supports us, that nurtures us, at least in some small way, and that taking part of that piece of the earth where we stand can be a form of mindfulness. It can make us feel better every day, and it can model for our children the ways that they can find their own well-being through compassion for others, including our animal and plant relatives. So there you have it.
Thank you, Dr. Sparrow. Thank you. And I think you're so right. I think when we think globally, and we're thinking global compassion here today, and we're thinking about what our kids need, they need a healthy planet. I mean, oh my goodness, this time as we're recording this and broadcasting this, right? Fires around the world and disasters and floods and unexpected places in New York and New England. And that's just here in the US, right? But that, caring for ourselves and our kids, of course, means caring for the planet, giving them, leaving them a planet, teaching them to be stewards. And I'm a mindfulness guy. I know a few of us are, and has brought us to this work too. And I think I really like this. Just literally, can you care for this part of the earth where you stand, right? And that is such an important model for our children, to teach them how to be stewards for them, again, the next generation, so that we can truly sustain life, which is so fundamental here. So I really appreciate all of the work that you've done over time, Dr. Sparrow. And I think, bringing it around to the climate, I think, is a really important point that we need to remember. So thank you. I know I talk fast. I know we've got a lot of folks for not a lot of time. I want to talk with all of you for hours, but some of us are neighbors, which is great. I'm also excited to hear a bit from Jen Moffat. Jen, would you like to share a little bit some of the solutions that you feel like, and some hope that you'd like to share with some folks in the audience in terms of the work that you're doing or work that people could be doing?
Thank you, Chris. It's a dream come true to be here. And I do have some hope. I want to share with you the impact that prenatal mindfulness training can have on families. The mindfulness-based childbirth and parenting MBCP class was created by Nancy Bardacke in 1998 and is now being taught all around the world. And it takes advantage of an expectation that's already in place, that people will take some kind of childbirth education in pregnancy, a time of great change in people's lives, a time when often people want to learn new things. And in addition to learning about the physiology of childbirth, parenting, and the newborn period over the course of 9 weeks, participants are also practicing mindfulness in class and outside class, training the mind to come back to the body, to the breath, to what is here in this moment, which I would encourage you to do now. As I review with you the 4 core intentions of MBCP. Number 1, intention is cultivating mindfulness as a life skill for decreasing stress during pregnancy. And we've already heard from some of the other participants in this panel that stress exists. And you know this in your own life. It's not theoretical anymore, that stress, including chronic stress and including the chronic stress of racism, can contribute to outcomes like preterm birth and low birth weight, depression and anxiety, and that those mental health issues can lead to attachment issues as well. Intention number 2 is using mindfulness for working with pain and fear during childbirth and beyond. For example, participants learn how bringing the attention to the sensations in the body can facilitate the decoupling of pain, the sensations in the body, from suffering, the thoughts and the feelings that we have about the pain. Intention 3 is sowing the seeds for parenting with attuned connection from the moments of birth. So in this society where people are constantly distracted, we're all carrying around computers in our pockets, participants are cultivating the capacity to pay attention on purpose, to be able to be there for the serve and return that we know is critical to our baby's healthy development, to be able to occasionally pause and then respond rather than reacting in many moments. And in doing so, sometimes meeting intention 4 of MBCP, which is interrupting intergenerational patterns of suffering. We know that contractions don't just happen in labor. They happen all the time throughout life. And in MBCP, we bring people's attention to the math of an average hour of labor. So for example, if you're having contractions every 3 minutes, and they're lasting 60 seconds, that would be about 20 minutes of pain in an average hour of labor. So then the question is, what's happening in the other 40 minutes? And what's happening is that the body is pumping in natural opiates, feel-good hormones. There can be some ease, some rest in between. But why aren't people talking about how great the breaks in between contractions were during their labor? Often it's because people's minds are either on how hard the last one was, or how difficult the next contraction is going to be. And of course, we're not just talking about labor, we're talking about life. But what we have is this moment right here, because we don't know what's going to happen this afternoon, tomorrow, etc. And what the research shows is that people who take MBCP have lower levels of pain catastrophizing, lower levels of perinatal depression and depression symptoms even 1 to 2 years later, and even in 2022 research 8 years later, lower rates of anxiety and higher rates of non-reactivity and self-compassion. I know I need that as a parent. And that there's an impact on infant social emotional development and maternal fetal attachment. And I use that gendered word intentionally because it's from particular research. More later. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Jen, Ms. Moffat. This is a wonderful perspective. And I think often about all of these metaphors for life that parenthood offers. And of course, or not of course, but I did not give birth, my wife did, but folks who are pregnant, like the contractions, the labor, that whole journey is just such a, whether it's a metaphor for parenting or a cosmic hazing ritual by the universe, I'm not sure, but there are so many such important lessons in there that, that there is pain, and yet there also is, these moments that there are not pain. And how do we lean into those and look to those and see life, whether it's labor or all of life or parenting or caregiving, not just parenting, right? And all of its complexities, and in all of the moments that there are these 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows to caregiving, just as there are many to those moments of labor. So I really appreciate you bringing that wisdom and reminding us of that in the caregiving journey. It's important for me to know right now some challenges with my own kids, and certainly many of my caseload. I want to make sure I keep moving on. Susan Kaiser Greenland, my old friend, it's so wonderful to see you. It's been a while. And I'd love to hear from you, thoughts, reflections, and solutions and hope that you might like to share with folks listening today and with our panel. And you're on mute still.
Well, sorry. Okay, sorry. It's so good to see you, Chris. It's been way too long. And thank you to you and to the Global Compassion Coalition for putting this together. I am honored and humbled to be among this remarkable group. We were asked to look at a couple questions, and one was the problems, and all of the panelists so far have been so correctly identifying the problems that I see in my work. One of them is just simply big feelings. Parents have strong feelings, understandable and justifiable strong feelings, regardless of where they are in the world and where they are in the socioeconomic spectrum. And one of the things that creates is the need for education, and the need for education on the basic fundamentals of our nervous system. I know as a young mom, as a working mom, I was a lawyer at the time, I was juggling different jobs. I didn't know nearly enough about how my nervous system worked. I didn't even understand, and I was a working lawyer at the time, that it made no sense to get into an argument with my children or my husband when all of the emotions were running high. I didn't understand that sort of simple, basic nervous system 101. And so the idea of providing education in that area to pretty much everybody, I think, is helpful. And one great example we just had was Ms. Moffat when she was talking about simple education for parents about what happens in the timeline of having a child, 1 minute of pain versus two minutes of not pain, and starting to reframe what's happening in our nervous system when strong emotions or physical pain arise. So I think that that's really important, and that's certainly one of the problems that I see. And that problem coupled with time. parents just are so busy and there just tends not to be enough time. But those two problems actually do create an opportunity. And I think that the pandemic did help us there. It hurt us in a lot of places, but it did help us there. I mean, there is no substitute for what Dr. Merrick is doing with the PCA of getting out into the homes and giving in-person home services. So I certainly am not suggesting this as a substitute for that. But given the time crunch of parents and given the new possibilities we have with Zoom and people's familiarization with it now, I think that technology now offers us a way to provide brief educational moments with families where both the child, the young child, the preschooler, for instance, and the parent are on the call together and on the call with other parents too. During the pandemic, we pulled together an Inner Kids Teachers Collaborative that for 10 weeks gave free online classes on mindfulness-based strategies. And we had this remarkable experience of people coming online from all over the world, just like is happening now. And the commonality, the parents understanding that the same problems are common across the world was very, very helpful to them. So I think that a great opportunity is Zoom. One of the things, though, that I think is important for people who are providing these classes, whether they are in person or whether they are online, is that we don't just deal with the mindfulness-based strategies to reduce stress. This is an important part. Obviously, we need to regulate first. So that's extremely important. But we need to remember that self-regulation includes calming strategies or grounding strategies, but it also, we can self-regulate with kindness, with connection, with compassion. So when we're giving these practical classes to parents and their children, hopefully together, it's important that we focus on certainly the nervous system regulation and calming strategies that are often associated with mindfulness, but also with attention, balance, and compassion, and with playfulness. And when we sequence those practices, it's extremely important that we follow a sequence that's similar to that coming from classic meditation, just as attention, balance, compassion, and playfulness come from classical meditation. And that sequence, the classical sequence is view, meditation, and application. And what we do in the Inner Kids program, for example, but there are people all over the world doing this in many different ways, is we talk about that sequence as play, practice, share, and apply. And why that's important is that we need to let the parents know while we're working with their kids and giving them strategies to take home with their kids after a brief, perhaps online session, we need to let the parents know not just the how, not just teach them about some breathing techniques that might help them ground them, but the why. And the why comes in understanding the view, understanding the universal themes that cut across all wisdom traditions that lead to a kinder and more compassionate society. And I was very, very appreciative of Josh's point about the planet. We just cannot take for granted anymore that this planet will always be with us in the way that we know. And so bringing in an awareness, a balance, and a compassion around how to live in our environment, playfully and in activities, that's a way to start really helping children at the very earliest years understand the context and the how, the why, and also the how. And also we know from so much experience that we tend to teach our kids, that our parents tend to learn from what their kids are being taught. So through teaching these activity-based practices or games that cultivate attention, balance, and compassion, and teach the how and the why, we're in effect also teaching the parents. I think the application is really important here because one of the things that we saw in preschool studies way back when that I'm sure is still being seen today is that when we know that a intervention or a strategy works, we know that because the children or the learners are taking that strategy outside of the classroom and applying it at home or at the playground. And all of us who have been in the field to bring mindfulness and and attention balance and compassion into education, into clinical settings, have countless stories. Chris, I'm sure you could just do an hour on them, of when parents come in and tell stories about, oh, I was stressed out about getting to work, or I was stressed out in traffic, and my 4-year-old or my 3-year-old in his car seat started singing the breathing song. And the result of that was I grounded and I laughed. And it creates a great opportunity for not just a calming, grounding strategy, but also for the enhancement of interpersonal connection, a healthy relationship between the parent and child, between the caregiver and child. So I think that covers most of the questions that I've been asked, except for the call to action and what can individuals do, what can groups do, and what can coalitions do. And I think that what my suggestion would be individuals, groups, and coalitions can all, either on your own, whether you're home in whatever country you're in, or whether you're part of a larger organization, can consider a way to leverage these technologies to create opportunities for parents and children together to be able to connect with other parents and children together in a fun and playful way. We had so much fun on these free online offerings, and the things we were able to do with technology, showing books on videos, sounds, that kids were throwing balls to each other through the Zoom screen, all sorts of things that we can do to keep the kids engaged, to keep them interested, while also offering parent education as well as education to the young children. So thank you again. I'm honored to be with you. I appreciate so much what you're doing, and thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. It's so good to see you. And I remember, I think your organization is now called Inner Kids. I don't know. I think briefly it was called Mindfulness Together. And I think about that so often when I think about you too, and how all of this is learning together. And I think, we call this co-regulation as sort of the, a really kind of trendy word these days. And I think often when people say, make me some mindful kids, make this school mindful. It's like, well, I know how to create stressed out, miserable kids. You just surround them with stressed out, miserable adults. But if you want compassionate, kind, mindful kids, it really starts with the community of the adults, right? That's really, the soil that's being fertilized, where those seeds of mindfulness can grow in kids. And then that kind of back and forth teaching of, as you were describing, like the kid reminding the parent, the children teaching the adults, the children teaching the peers. And that's where I think it's so beautiful with so much of, I think, what so many folks are doing. I'm a therapist is my training. So it's very, in the Western world, psychotherapy is very one-on-one. It reflects our individualistic society. And with the mental health crisis on top of it, there's no way we're going to one-to-one therapy our way out of the mental health crisis that kids, teens, and adults are facing. It's going to have to be resilience-oriented, public health-oriented, thinking like everyone else on this panel, besides those who are trained like me, are taught. How do we? Because it's also then people learning from their peers, right? Not just in this top-down way or this one-to-one way. And I feel like hearing that reflected in this panel, I'm really inspired by that as well. So I want to make sure I'm turning to the last person on our panel, Rebecca Parlakian. We'd love to hear some of your thoughts, hope, and tips and ways.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So at 0 to 3, our mission is very simple. And it's to ensure that all babies and toddlers have a strong start in life. And so the way we do that is we try to kind of reach all the adults surrounding that baby or toddler. And that includes our 3 primary audiences, which are parents, professionals, and policymakers. And I would just like to kind of, as 0 to 3's child development and parenting specialist, I do want to just sort of lift parents' voices into this discussion, because we really do partner with parents in all of the work we do, setting our policy agenda, working at the state and federal level to enact that policy agenda. But also, we are partnering with parents in developing the kinds of resources and learning experiences that they want to engage in with the professionals they're working with. So, 0 to 3 conducted a national survey of parents, and the results were poignant and not surprising, because what we heard is that 9 in 10 parents in the US today feel judged all or part of the time that they're parenting in public. And at the same time, 69% of parents, almost 7 in 10, said that they would use more positive parenting strategies if they knew them. And 80% of parents really believe that parenting is a set of skills that can be learned. At the same time, parents acknowledged exactly what we heard today, which is that they have big feelings. Almost half of parents said that their biggest parenting challenge was managing their own feelings and reactions with their children. And, after years of working with parents, I've really come to see, I think we have this sense that parenting is an or scenario. Like, well, you're either angry at your baby or you just love them unconditionally. But it's not an or scenario, it's an and. I think we're building relationships with our babies and toddlers, relationships, intimate relationships like that. Family relationships are complex. And so it's an and. You can love your baby unconditionally and be really angry at times with your baby. And I think learning to accept those feelings in yourself and making sense of them, and being able to regulate yourself, as we've heard from previous speakers, and also to revel in the joys and delights, as we heard from a previous speaker, is so critical. So I'll just give you one example of how we took parents' voices and embedded that into a product that we're creating right now. So we have this results from our parent survey. We also decided to speak with a group of parents. We did 5 focus groups of parents across the US, and we used the themes from that, those data points, to really develop a series of learning experiences that we're developing as a parent cafe. And this parent cafe model really elevates parents' expertise. It's really a series of rich discussions with parents about issues that are important to them, like self-regulation, like managing challenging behavior, like building strong families, and gives them an opportunity to be partners in that delivery. So it's not one way and didactic. It's parents sharing their own wins and their own expertise and their own questions and vulnerabilities too. But, I think that model of bringing in parents' voices quite intentionally, but also to look for what communities need. So in the US, we know that parents are not getting a huge amount of support. I think, to answer the questions, what are the problems? I can only speak for the US, but one of our biggest issues is that we lack paid leave following the addition of a new baby to our lives. And, 85% of Americans have no access to paid family leave. Yet 84% of our voters support paid family and medical leave. So this is something we need to grapple with as a nation. I think our first speaker said, a lot of times, we don't disagree with what babies and toddlers need, but we disagree about who has to pay for it. And I think this is one of those central issues. I think another issue that we grapple with that, again, may be primarily centered in the US, but it's a lack of equitable access to early learning experiences. So many other nations view the period of birth to 5, this, bringing in a new human being to our community and our culture and our nation. They view it as a collective responsibility. But unfortunately, in the US, care and education in those first 5 years is viewed as the parent's responsibility, the family's sole responsibility. And we know that what that results in is inequitable access to high quality care and education experiences. So, what I think I would say are the best bets are investments that really integrate parent support, parent education, child health, high quality learning, to embed that into our systems in ways that are intentional and equitable so that we can invest early to avoid remediating later. So I'm going to pause there because I know that you want to elicit some questions from the audience, but thank you again for letting me share.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I can't believe just how qualified and inspiring everyone on this panel is. Everyone's doing such wonderful stuff. I'm curious if folks have any, folks listening, please send along questions, comments, observations. I know we've all got different struggles, whether we're parents or professionals. We've got, struggles based on, culture and geography and so many other, kinds of challenges. We'll do our best from where we sit, but please start dropping any questions in. And I really would, as we continue maybe moving around a little bit to the panel, if I guess just one thing you'd really want a parent and one thing you'd really want a professional, and let me not say parent, actually, let me say caregiver, unpaid caregiver, let me say professional caregiver to really take away in terms of how we can best invest in the next generation, if folks want to share a bit about that as we wait for questions to trickle in.
I can go. This is Melissa. First of all, I'm appreciative to see all this context in the chat, hunger, poverty, inequity. And I would say to parents, none of us does this job of parenting alone, right? So it doesn't matter that I'm a child psychologist by training, similar training to you, Chris, and I have a degree and I have a husband who has a job, and we had Zoom access and our kids could do virtual learning during the pandemic. And let me just tell you, humbly, we were stressed out every day and we have big feelings and we don't always manage our own emotion, so first of all, dispelling the myth that there's any perfect parent out there, there's not. Right? We're all doing the very best that we can do. And so then what I say to professionals in the broader ecosystem is that there's a role for all of us in this work to help make sure families, again, have what they need when they need it. We need all of these things that you've heard about today and many other supports for the conditions where parents can come to this most important job of parenting with their best thinking selves, with their most compassionate selves, with their most regulated selves, right? So I think in that way, there's a lot of hope in this work because there's a role for each and every one of us.
Thank you. And I think it's a reminder too. I mean, I think about just how challenging the pandemic has been with so many more ACEs as have been described, and reminder that there's no perfect parent, certainly among us experts. I speak for myself. The day in the pandemic that my son whacked my daughter over the head with a mindfulness book that my wife and I wrote together, it's like, yeah, none of us is doing this just right, but self-compassion and knowing that, again, this is this point of connection, as Chris Germer and Kristen Neff from the Mindful Self-Compassion world would remind us of, common humanity, right? Where can we connect around that with some self-forgiveness and patience with ourselves? That's going to be the key to regulation for so many of us. Yeah. Other thoughts or last takeaways for folks watching?
I just would like to remind people, because I remind it myself so often, especially in the context of my work, just how there is rarely a one-size-fits-all solution. And that's why the work that people are doing who are getting actually into homes and dealing one-on-one with parents who don't have internet access, that's why that work is so important and so necessary. Because if we're stressed, if we're hungry, if we're tired, we're not going to be able to regulate. And we need to help people see that and help give strategies for things as simple as sleep, how to rest. So it's easy to want to take everything to scale, and I think we need to take things to scale. But I think it's an approach where these two things happen at the same time. We need things going to scale, but we also need things that are more directly impact and can educate individual families and find ways of doing both. because I know as a parent and a lot of the parents that I've worked with, there's a sense of, I'm not doing this right. And I've heard this on the panel too. And a sense of, oh, everybody else has figured this out, but not me. And a sense of attributing blame to yourself that may be caused by factors that are entirely outside of your control right now. So that kind of not expecting a one size fits all fast, quick solution to absolutely everything. I think that's good.
Everything, everywhere, all at once, right? Both and, as Melissa said.
And if I could just jump in, I wanted to just echo Susan's earlier comment about the possibilities inherent in gathering online like this. You know, we did an evaluation of an online parent education experience, the one I mentioned earlier. It had a mindfulness component in it, also the parent cafe model. And what we found is that the evaluation results showed that parents grew in their self-compassion and in their mindful capacity. And this was even online. And so I just think, you know, given parent time, and parents joined us folding laundry, they joined us in their cars. I mean, it was truly meeting parents where they were at. And we also had an angel effect where moms were joining on their phone, but they were in the room with dads and grandmas who also jumped in and participated. And so to really think about this idea of partnering with parents through technology, but in a lot of ways you can touch more broadly a family unit. So just to keep ourselves grounded in the possibilities.
Absolutely. Some questions come up. How can we best network with schools and other public resources or institutions to bring resources? Any thoughts on that? Those that are doing that work of making those connections?
Well, I think one of the most powerful forces in the school system is the parents. And in many of the schools that I've worked, the reason that there's a mindfulness-based program in the school in the first place is because there was a motivated parent to bring it there. And unfortunately, what often happens is when that parent's child leaves the school, moves on, the mindfulness program fades away because you do need an advocate inside the system. So if you are a parent and have children in any system, whether it's a soccer club or whether it's a school, you have a strong, powerful voice to be able to go in and start, talking to the teachers and the administration. I just would encourage you to do so with immense compassion and humility, because one of the things we see in the school systems is just teachers are also parents and are being pulled in multiple directions. So understanding that when you're talking to them about the possibility of adding something to their already crowded to-do list is an important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, I saw something about teachers, like, you want more on our plates? Like, you need to give us a bigger plate here. Like, we've got so much, and so many folks, I think are feeling so overwhelmed. Absolutely. I see some good reminders also of some of the, we can think about the emotional supports, but also just a reminder of how many folks are struggling with food insecurity, with just basic safety needs, with these other kinds of concerns, in terms of the very basics of survival. We think about Maslow's pyramid, right? And how distant that can seem, the top of that for so many folks. And I think it's an important reminder as we think globally and even within our own country or within North America, how many folks are struggling with those issues as well.
I would just like to say about that, actually, that in Massachusetts right now, our Mass Health C3 has acknowledged that food insecurity and housing insecurity are directly related to health, of course. Yeah. And so our pregnant patients can be connected to housing specialists and also can receive 6 months of meals prenatally and 6 months of meals postpartum if they have Mass Health. And so that needs to be a model that happens throughout the country. There are the resources that exist for that to happen. It needs to be redistributed. And I also want to make sure that people who are struggling with food and housing and very basic needs are not overlooked in terms of some of the interventions we're talking about with stress reduction. Because who is more stressed out than someone who's trying to figure out how to get food on the table? And so just like we wouldn't want people to be overlooked if a high quality cardiology intervention were available, we want to make sure, and this is one of the reasons I teach at our community health center, because patients come every Saturday and come back the next Saturday and say, I really was so frustrated when I was woken up the other day at 5 a.m., but I just came to my breath, turned over, and snuggled the kid and went back to sleep. And so I think if we can take 2 words away from today, I would go with both and. Thank you.
Thank you. And I as we come to an end, and I would imagine our panelists are hopefully willing to, share resources. And I think folks have shared their websites of their organizations, and I'm sure have wonderful resources for folks watching either live or watching later recordings. But I think to me also, there's so many aspects of our world where both and are so important, especially we also opened with talking about our very politicized political time that we're in, and so many disagreements and so many things. People are saying this is because of this and this is because of that. And we know from all great wisdom traditions that everything is multiply determined, that nothing is caused by just one person, that we are all absolutely in this together with our collective nervous systems, and an individual decision ripples out to impact the 8 billion of us on this planet who are people, and not to mention all the other beings and resources and plants and animals on this planet. So that every one of our actions is connected. It is both and all of it, which can make it, as someone else said, where do we begin? But I think starting where you are, as Dr. Sparrow said, care for this place where you are, care for these people in front of you, that is probably where we can make the biggest impact. All of you are amazing. I learned so much. I'm so excited to meet all of you. I'm so grateful that the Global Compassion asked me to join and facilitate this conversation, and tremendous work behind the scenes went on with GCC, as well as the folks in front of the scenes. All the work you're doing out there, amazing, phenomenal work. The folks on the panel, everyone watching, I know that you are out there doing amazing work for the children under your care, the families under your care. And thank you for coming to join us, and let us know what you want to hear more about too, because we're here for you.
This podcast was brought to you by the Global Compassion Coalition. To access more content like this, as well as resources integrating compassion into your daily routine, make sure to subscribe to this podcast and visit our website at globalcompassioncoalition.org.